Good afternoon, everyone. It is a high honor for me to be here with you. I am humbled by the invitation to be the Schaff Lecturer for 2017. I recognize that these are honors that speak to an opportunity that's rare, to speak into a moment. And so I am very thankful that you have chosen me for this. I want to begin by thanking Director Blyer for hosting me and offering stunning hospitality. She and Lori have done a fantastic job of making sure I got here and kept me from getting lost and showed me some of the beauty, not only of Pittsburgh, but we had the joy of being in Youngstown, Ohio, and I consider that equal joy to have spent a little time in that community and shared with the women and men there. It is also a great joy to be in the presence of your president, Dr. Esterline. He is one of those rare, wonderful presidents in the ATS family, and so to be in his presence is great. And with your stunning dean, dear Sister Heather, it is great to be in the presence also of David, wonderful alum from my years at Duke. I also want to acknowledge Hunter and Ruth Farrell. We were in seminary together many, many, many years ago, and they look exactly the same. I look exactly the same, and they look exactly the same. we shared a meal together, and we reminisced, and it's such a joy to be with people who are serious Christians. And this wonderful man and this wonderful woman, they are serious Christians, and it is a joy. It is a joy to know that they remain doing vital work, and I am just so thrilled to have had the opportunity to see and be with them again. And I also want to acknowledge a dear friend from my college days. You all know him as Tony, who writes for your local paper, and I understand that he's such a celebrated commentator. Well, I knew him as Marvin many, many years ago, and we both were slightly smaller men, and we both had hair. We were undergraduates together at Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan, young, looking to a bright future, excited about what we were going to do to change the world. And I am so thrilled that he has not lost his sense of humor, that he has not lost his sense of humor. It is also a great joy to be in the presence of so many wonderful pastors these last couple of days, both down in Youngstown, Ohio, and here in the Pittsburgh area. What an honor and what a joy to be in the presence of women and men who are doing the courageous work of ministry. I never take it lightly to be in your presence. And of course, last but not least, the stunning students of Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. What a joy to be with you. You have some good ones here. I think the world is going to be changed from this place forward. So always a pleasure to be in the presence of students. I bring you warmest greetings from the faculty, staff, and dean of Yale Divinity School, where we endeavor every day to shape world-changing intellectuals. We're serious about these things at Yale. Either change the world or go home. That's the way we like to think. And I want really every Christian to think that way. Either change the world or go home. So in our time together, I want to explore with you how to draw lines and circles. Now, I'm sure everyone here must have some memory of their earliest artistic work of drawing lines and circles. It's one of the first things we invite children to do with paper, pencil, crayon, and now we make that same invitation to children using computers and e-tablets to draw a line and a circle with a writing instrument or with our finger in the dirt or sand or even in the water. It's a basic act of expression. Creatures, not just human beings, draw lines and circles. One of the first acts that creatures do to communicate, to connect, or to construct anything is to draw a line or a circle. So much of our communicative reality, how, why, and to whom we communicate, is formed by the line. So much of how we understand and construct reality, geographic, spatial, architectural, and emotional, depends on how we draw lines. And so much of how we imagine belonging and connection, recognition, and accountability depends on how we imagine the lines that run through us, the lines that separate us, and the lines that connect us to others. Lines are basic and crucial for living life. This afternoon, I want to engage you in the important theological work of thinking the line. And later this evening, I want to engage you in the important work of thinking the circle. We have come to the point in our world where we have no choice but to think the line afresh, because we have been taught to draw the line, live the line, and think the line in ways that are destroying us. As Reviel Netz notes in his marvelous book on the history of barbed wire, our world is formed by means of the line. As he said, a closed line was made in order to prevent motion from outside the line to its inside. And from that closed line was derived the idea of property. With that same line, we prevent motion from the inside of the line to the outside, and we derived the idea of the prison. And then with an open line, we prevented motion in either direction, and from it, we derived the idea of the border. Property, prison, border. Property, prison, border. It is through the prevention of motion that space enters history. Space has entered history. Our history fundamentally distorted, and we must think the line. We must think the line in order to grasp that distortion. It is a distortion so deep and so wide that we cannot distinguish it from what is natural. It is a distortion that involves both space and body, earth and sky, animal and plant. Now, something that wide and comprehensive surrounds us like snow, like falling snow. And just like the best way to touch snow is to touch a single snowflake, we will touch our massive distortion by touching the line. Lines are everywhere. We know them in so many ways. They guide the fabricated distinctions between nation states who all share a common earth. As the celebrated botanist Peter Raven has said, this planet and all biological life can no longer afford a world shaped by the nation. A world shaped by the selfishness, greed, and narcissism of nation states, each trying to secure the well-being of only their own people in utter disregard of the ecosystems that sustain us all. Raven echoes the clarion call issued by the great Vandana Shiva, the famed environmental activist and physicist who has warned us repeatedly of the devastating effects of the loss of our biodiversity. But lines create the illusion that separation exists where it actually does not. Lines also guide the racial and geographic segregation that shapes life in the West, and especially in this country. Lines facilitate our racial animus and the deep structural, spatial, and spiritual divides that animate this country. Helen, can I probe you for a little water? Thank you. My fundamental point this afternoon is that a Christian doctrine of creation should guide us in how to draw lines that do two things. First, how to sense our connectivity in and with the world. And secondly, how to form alliances, social, cultural, political, and economic, that are deep, abiding, and surprising for the sake of life. We who believe in a God who became flesh in Jesus Christ, thank you so much, must learn to think the line redemptively. That is, to show what Christians drawing lines should look like and do in this world. But in order to think the line redemptively, we must first look at how we as Christians thought and performed the line in distortion, creating distortion. We distorted the line. The causes of the distortion that we inhabit would, of course, take me far more time than I have to unpack this afternoon. But I want to consider one of its more immediate causes that has decisively shaped our life with the line. That more immediate cause is the historic collaboration of three agents of the New World, agents that came to share power from the beginning of the 15th century onward. The three crucial agents necessary for that earth-shattering distortion were the merchant, the missionary, and the soldier. The merchant, the missionary, and the soldier. Together they formed the world we now inhabit, and together they taught us how to live the line. No other agents in the new worlds were or are as important as these three agents. Other agents, like citizen, statesman, even peasant, derive their identities and operations in the new worlds from the ground clearing and ground forming work of the merchant, the soldier, and the missionary. There is a term in proper Trinitarian theology that helps us understand the incredible work of the merchant, the soldier, and missionary. And this term refers to the mutual indwelling of the Father, Son, and Spirit. It is perichoresis. Perichoresis speaks to the actions and identity of the triune God. It suggests operations that are distinct but not divisible, and an identity revealed only through the relations themselves, Merchant, missionary, and soldier function in a perichoretic reality in the new worlds. we have to understand the incredible power of their interaction. That is, their mutual indwelling. There is a mutual indwelling that developed between these three agents that set in place our world. These agents in relation show us the creative power of creatureliness that can be turned toward life or death. What makes their perichoretic existence complex is that they create through destruction and they destroy through creating. And they taught us how to function in their modes of existence, their ways of being. Now, I will not in our time draw you to specific merchants, soldiers, and missionaries, because that also would take a while to unfold any particular constellation of their activity, and that's what I'm working on with my next book. Suffice for this moment to simply capture in very broad strokes some of their epic characteristics, beginning with their courage. We must never underestimate this single virtue. It took courage to be a missionary. Yet alongside the courage of a missionary was the courage of a merchant. And alongside the courage of a merchant was the courage of a soldier. Our modern world comes to life inside that courage, because it is precisely that courage that bound spaces together. Geographies were connected through the bodies of these three agents. Why? Because they went where no one else had the courage to go. And each presented a way to be and to live in the new world. We should also add another energy that flowed between these three agents, and that was greed. Greed. We must never, ever underestimate that single energy. Greed is, of course, the desire to accumulate, but it is also the desire to gather together, to bring into the fold, as Pope Nicholas said so eloquently, and to make all things new through possession. Courage and greed bookend our three agents: merchant, soldier, and missionary. There is another distinction that I need to make here with the missionary. A distinction between, in fact, two types of missionaries. There were those missionaries fully at rest, functioning with merchant and soldier. And then there were those missionaries who resisted, finding their faith in these new lands and the voices of indigenous peoples, finding in their voices God's word to them to change and join, to become one with the people they imagine themselves instructing. Sisters and brothers, we don't have enough easily accessible stories to fill out their testimonies. Testimonies we greatly need at this moment. We need the stories of those missionaries that went rogue in the good sense, the ones that were kicked out of their denominations, kicked out of their societies, who were pushed away because they went too deep. They became one with the people they were at. We don't have their stories because in many cases their stories were denied, their stories were destroyed. But it is their stories that are the true stories of the faith. Unfortunately, the second missionary will not be our focus this afternoon, but that first one, the one in league with the other agents. Well, Dr. Jennings, what did they do? I'm so glad you asked me that. Together, merchant, missionary, and soldier reordered our sense of land, animal, plant, earth, and body through forming life in abiding enclosure. 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 That is the word I want you to hold on to this afternoon and this evening. That is the word because it speaks everything done by this unholy trinity. They enclosed the land, forming private property, and they enclosed the body, forming racial identity. They came to the new worlds, separating people from land, separating identity from place, separating connectivity from relationality, and turning the world and its multiple beautiful peoples, turning the land and its multiple beautiful forms of life all into commodity form. They turned the world into possession in an absolute sense. They not only made the world and its people sellable, but they taught us, they were the great teachers, they taught us to see the world in fragmentation and enclosure. A question: what is private property? What is modern private property, if not the victory of fragmentation and enclosure? What is race, if not the victory of fragmentation and enclosure? They are two sides of the same coin. This is what most race theorists, most ethicists, most people who think about geography do not yet see. Racial vision profoundly distorted our sense of connection and relationality with the earth, with animals, and with each other. Racial vision made it almost impossible for us to sense our boundedness to other creatures and to the earth itself. It has hollowed out our sense of deep belonging to one another by replacing that sense of belonging with a vision of racial belonging far more palatable, far more palpable, and powerful than any other form of belonging. And it all begins with the taking of the land. Everything begins with the taking of the land. I could tell this piece of the story all evening, but I can't. So in brief, let me just say this. The merchant took the land, stripping people of any direct connection to land and animal for their identity and for their destiny. The soldier defended the work of the merchant in dividing up and selling the land through the use of violence or the threat of violence. And the missionary, working between the merchant and the soldier, domesticated and transformed the land to fit the white body in manner, shape, and comfort. But these three agents also borrowed from and infused each other with their spirit. The soldier helped shape the vision of a disciplined, compliant, docile body for the missionary's work of redeeming the native body. The missionary helped shape the vision of the merchant's work to imagine it as aligned with gospel work. And the merchant, God bless the merchant. The merchant showed the missionary and the soldier how to draw the new world toward the good that is in God in its productivity and utilization. Missionary, soldier, and merchant together offered us a twofold vision of existence through property and race that has made it almost impossible for us to sense our boundedness to other creatures and the earth itself. They gave us a new form of possessive logic. Now, people the world over have always had a sense of themselves as belonging to particular lands. And through this way of belonging, please pay attention to the way I just put that, through this way of belonging articulated in multiple ways their claims to place. The vast majority would have never reversed what I just said. They would have never said possession of comes before possession by. They are possessed by the land before they would even speak of possessing the land. Yet these claims to place were permeable while bounded, movable within nomadic logics while stable, and identity constituting while being expandable to those who would also choose to inhabit the land of these people. In other words, people could join them in the land and become a part of them. There could and would be land and animal seizure as one people group sought to expand its territory and its claim to waterways, hunting and planting grounds, and so forth. Fights and wars over land were not invented by the merchants, missionaries, and soldiers. That's not what I'm saying. There would also be identity differences as peoples narrated their stories in distinction from the stories of other peoples and registered their differences through their practices in the land and with animals, and who constituted for so many permanent familial relations. The three agents, however, in their collective genius, transformed the old into the new by guiding the world into new ways of drawing lines and circles, both outside the body and upon the body. The production of lines to separate spaces that were in fact not separate took on a new economic determination as the privatization of land and places sliced through forms of identity, both spatial and human. The North American grid system, the North American grid system, inspired by the thinking of Thomas Jefferson, as so much was. The North American grid system, inspired by his thinking and executed through the Land Ordinance of 1785, exemplified a way of thinking that would form the normal in us. Lines would be drawn across the lands of indigenous peoples, lines that were theoretical, material, and economic, lines cutting through space and time, flesh and bone, bear and tree, fish and bird, lines slicing through the living and the dead, grounds and homes, hopes and dreams, rivers, streams, lines that knew no history, respected no story, understood no rhythm of song or life, lines that gestured eternality. What was being made by the line may not be unmade. The line was the womb of modern private property that normalized in us connection and disconnection, inside and out. Yet the line outside the body was also the line within the body, as people were habituated to see the line that was in fact not there, and who internalized the line as a boundary of existence. The line determined what was and was not mine, and therefore what was and was not my concern. The line determined what was and was not connected to me, and therefore what demanded both moral obligation and action from me. Concern and moral obligation had always, long before the three agents, been limited by and directed through people, groups, or even royal edict. But the three agents, by means of the line, turned that limitation and direction into a spatial absurdity by removing or creating new forms of moral obligation based on property ownership. The line could and did separate worlds by inches. We have been taught that our moral obligations and ethical responsibilities to know and love, to share what we have, ends at the line. Only, think about it, friends, only an extraordinary act presses us over the line of property, of prison, of border. And that extraordinary act we have been habituated to feel as an abnormal act, a strange and fearful act. I'm doing something unnatural here. I'm stepping over the line. Yet the most powerful work of the line, formed in the hands of those agents, was the way they used the line to shape our vision of need. Merchants arrived to the New Worlds seeking to establish three operations in relation to human need. Three operations. First, they wanted to intercept local ecologies through which needs were determined and met, and insert themselves into those local ecologies. Secondly, they wanted to create new needs. And thirdly, they wanted to control the flow of needs by controlling the interaction of groups and manipulating the strategies of exchange of goods and services. The merchants sought to control how and why people are joined in the process of caring for their everyday needs. The market needs to be right in the center of the meeting of needs. If it is not, it loses all its power. It has to be there. And the merchants understood that. They wanted to control how we sought to address our needs. The merchant did not want a communal determination, reorientation, and articulation of needs outside his control. That is, outside the control of the market. So the merchant drew a line between our needs, placing our thinking about what we need inside our thinking the line. The new thing was the fracturing of human need. The needs of a community could be now sliced up into individual needs, each of which could be intercepted and interpreted by the merchant and the market. Equally important, the merchant enabled the parallel pursuit of interest by communities and peoples, so that people's imaginations followed that parallelism. In short, the merchant disrupted the possibility of imagining needs together, shared, mutual interpenetrating, and community constituting. The way of the merchant is to imagine needs in fragmented and fragmenting ways, reaching all the way into the inner discernment of needs. I want you to think your need alone. At that point, I've won. I've won. If there would be communities within the merchant way of imagining needs, each community would be guided to think like an individual caring for her needs. The merchant's operation concealed the deepest truth. We are all creatures in need, and we are bound together in those needs. The merchant's way demands the line that blocks connecting people precisely inside of and through human need across multiple boundaries. Yet with the merchant, others come to exist primarily in only one of two ways when it comes to need. Either they help us fulfill our needs by being our customers or consumers, or they exist as our enemies and competitors in the pursuit of what we need. The soldier followed the work of the merchant by clearing the way for us to meet our needs. The soldier bound our sight to the line, disciplining our attention by means of the line, and in so doing, helping to conform us to the merchant's vision of others. Again, the line has created an absurdity. needs that are joined, needs that are in fact one, must be separated, because the soldier teaches us when it comes to meeting our needs, we are at war. We are at war. The mode of the soldier invites us to perform what the merchant desires. And the missionary lodged between the merchant and the soldier found herself torn between a calling and the limitation of the line. Colonial missionaries may have heard the call of God to go into the world, but they found themselves localized, sequestered, and asked to be the high priest of particular people who have claimed particular land for themselves. The local was already constituted by the merchant and the soldier. The work of the local church was from the beginning of the colonial moment already compromised in terms of its focus and its ability to keep in view the deeper points of connection between peoples. Church after church, century after century, separated a gospel work with native conversion and subjugation on the one side, and on the other side caring for the pastoral needs of white colonial settler citizens. The direction of ministerial work followed the trajectory of the line, and a pastoral imagination formed that could not discern or lacked the courage to connect ecologies of human need. So we were bequeathed a pastoral imagination and ecclesial practice that rarely, if ever, sought the joining of human need, native, European, African, immigrant. Rather, like the merchant and the soldier, the missionary normalized a segregation of need made natural by the line. As you've already picked up, the line is not primarily a metaphor. It is real. It is real and it is imagined. It is inside of us, helping to constitute our subjectivity, and it is outside of our bodies, guiding our vision and our actions. We live the line, from our properties to our prison to our borders, moving from our inner states to our external limitations, and we are both subject to its power and we empower the line to guide us. So my point not to be missed is that in order to do gospel work, especially at this urgent moment, we must address the line. And I want to suggest we need to address the line in two crucial ways. You already know what I'm going to say, so let me just go ahead and say it. We need to remove the line. And we need to map new lines. Now, what I am saying, those of you who are really quick and you've already picked this up, what I am saying may sound like pure anarchy. Yeah. That's what it sounds like. That was a nervous laugh, man. Yeah, was a very nervous laugh. Because too many people accept the line as the inevitable and necessary structuring of reality, social, political, geographic, and especially economic life. And in fact, let's be clear, there are many people who benefit from exactly how we draw lines shaped in the Trinitarian pedagogy of the merchant, the missionary, and the soldier. But for we Christians who believe in the triune God who has created all that is, we understand the line differently. You know, in that first epic Matrix movie of the famed trilogy, and of course you all know this very well versed in high culture. In the first Matrix movie, the main character Neo goes to meet the Oracle. You all remember this? He goes to meet the Oracle. And while he is waiting to meet the Oracle, he encounters a small child. Remember this part? Small child sitting on the floor, bending spoons with its mind. So Neil comes over to the child, and Neil picks up a spoon, and Neil starts to bend it with his mind. And then the child says, in this very soft British accent, the child says, of course, the key is to realize that there is no spoon. The key is to realize that there is no line. One creator, one world, one love that binds all that is to God. In becoming human and living at the sight of the creature, God has claimed the entire creation in desire and hope. God's claim on us, realized in Jesus, is the basis of the great transgressing. God transgresses the lines we have constructed, even in the name of God. Remember the geographic drama in Acts 10. Remember that? Cornelius, the centurion, sends his people where they would normally never go, where they would never come, to a Jew inside the house of a tanner. The fact that the Jews, even in the house of a tanner, is already transgression. Peter and those with him come to the home of a Gentile where they would never normally come as Jews. But this is the Spirit of God's doing. God is orchestrating a meeting that transgresses boundaries, real boundaries, and promises a revolutionary joining. Throughout the book of Acts, as I've told people for the last couple of days, God is sending people where they don't want to do and crossing lines they would prefer not to cross, that they are afraid to cross. So I am proposing a geographic anarchy through the transgression of the line. Anybody want to sign up? A geographic anarchy through the transgressing of the line. Again, more nervous laughter. The transgression of lines is rooted in the claim of God on all that is for the purpose of joining us together. We Gentiles are Christians because God demanded that Peter and Cornelius transgress the lines, transgress those lines. Our life of discipleship has always been about line crossing in order to map new lines. The anthropologist Keith Basso said that most of us in the Western world are geographically adrift, having no deep sense of place. He spoke those words from having spent many decades living among the Apache and among the Yupik people and among others. We live almost always above the ground, rarely touching the earth and sensing our connectivity with this world. But what stabilizes us geographically? What stabilizes us geographically is not the ground, not the earth, and certainly not plant or animal. What stabilizes us is the line, the property line, and the line separating us from the incarcerated and separating some neighborhoods from other neighborhoods that are already in carceral spaces, and the line that constitutes borders. That's what stabilizes us geographically. These lines, as they have come to be configured for us, are also in us, shaping our moral and theological imagination, shaping our subjectivity, and guiding our interior life and our identities. The lines, as they are now configured, block a deep sense of connectivity, crucial for us to do gospel work of joining people in love, care, and hope. Mapping new lines is the way we transgress the death-forming work of the line as it now exists for us. New lines are about creating new alliances, new life generating alliances. So here, my friends, the point not to be missed, as I'm wrapping up, the point not to be missed is this. We must think alliances geographically first, before we think them in other important ways. Place matters to God, and the line that separates us must give way to the line that connects us. Too often we Christians think alliances economically, politically, socially, denominationally, culturally, and in other ways, and we bypass the most crucial starting point, the ground, the building, the neighborhood, the subdivision, the community, the city, east side, west side, north side, south side, roads, back streets, alleys, sidewalks, highways, parking lots, parks, gardens, front porches. The alliance must be geographically mapped first. Another one of my favorite anthropologists, Tim Ingold, in his marvelous book called Lines, offers us a lovely taxonomy of lines. He places lines in two general categories, and I will discipline myself and be brief because I can get lost in this wonderful topic. So he places lines in two general categories. There are threads and there are traces. There are threads and there are traces. Yeah. He says that not all lines fall into these categories, but most do. Threads are lines that connect points in three-dimensional space. For example, a phone line or a necklace or a washing line or a cord that runs from an earbud to a cell phone. A trace, he says, is any enduring mark left in or on a solid surface by a continuous movement. A line drawn on paper with a pen or a crayon is a trace. A line drawn on a body in a tattoo is a trace. A line made by walking on a particular patch of dirt or grass is a trace. And he says we could distinguish between what he calls additive and reductive traces. Additive traces are ones that are layered onto surfaces, like the trail a snail leaves when they travel on their merry way. Reductive traces are lines that are scratched, scorched, or etched into a surface, like when a bird bores repeatedly into wood, making that wonderful noise while she or he is doing it, right? That noise into wood, creating a line pattern. Or when a deer leaves their prints in mud or snow. Ingold offers us a third class of lines, which he calls ruptures in surfaces. They are cuts, cracks, and creases. These are lines often formed contingently, unintentionally, by the creation of other things. Well, thank you, Dr. Jennings, for all this, but why is this important? I'm so glad you asked that question. Now, Ingold's taxonomy is helpful as we begin to think about mapping new lines. To keep it simple, in case you got lost in all that, threads are lines that you make and map in space, not touching surfaces. And traces are lines that you make and map on top of surfaces or actually into surfaces. I want you to think about lines that we must make and map as Christians in order to do gospel work today in terms of threads and traces. So let's think of just one kind of trace and just one kind of thread. There could be many more, but I just want to think of one because I don't want to tax your patience near the end of this lecture. But let's just think of one of each. Let's think of tracing a new geographic, a new economic geography. In response to a pledge made by Jesus, by a scribe who said he would follow him wherever he goes. Jesus uttered those famous words we all know so well. Foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Matthew 8:19 and 20. But rather than imagine this as a signature of the homelessness of Jesus or his lack of property ownership, as I heard a few commentators say, whoo, very strange. I want to think about this in relation to the demand to follow him, the demand of discipleship in the face of house and home. In the face of house and home, which are our new fetish, our new point of idolatry, house and home. Brian J. McCabe, in a wonderful book called No Place Like Home, Wealth, Community, and Politics, and the Politics of Ownership, said that a nation of home ownership has become one of the primary ways to indoctrinate people into maintaining and supporting the status quo, acquiescing to deep capitalist logics, and resisting systemic social change that would involve the operations of real estate through the reformation of neighborhoods and communities. Home ownership has been one of the most powerful ways to enslave us. We must find new ways to map new lines across property divides that are the physical and material causes of segregation, gender, racial, cultural, and class segregation. We need to get real estate companies, city planners, community activists, organizers, homeless people, and everybody else who is interested in space, get them together to rethink the home. Maybe we can cut into the surfaces of spaces, new patterns of living. Now, if that seems unrealistic, too idealistic or utopian, then maybe we can create a crack or a cut or crease where real estate logics and the desires of planters have created yet another hard line that divides the haves from the have-nots, and then configured policing practices to reinforce that divide, because all policing, we know, follows the way of the soldier. All policing follows the line. But what if we conceive the home and neighborhood as transgressing space that join people together normally divided by income and outlook, by race and class, by gender and family structure, threading a new line of connection through need. Let's think about threading a new line of connection through need. The merchant, as I said already, placed himself right where Jesus wanted to be, there between us and our needs, between the needs of others, joining people together in their need through himself and the market. We know this. We know that this is the place Jesus wanted because he offered us his body precisely at the place of our need. Jesus did not shame us in our hungers, in our need to consume, but he turned that need into his own life. He joins us together at our deepest needs, and he desires to join us together in the meeting of our needs. But it is the meeting of our needs that the power of the line is most powerful, forming in us a blindness to the most obvious realities of shared struggle, shared desire, shared hope. People see their own needs, and they will often see the needs of their own people, but they will rarely, if ever, see the needs of people joined. This is a challenge that existed long before the merchant, and it points to the work God has taken into God's self through the Son and in the Spirit in joining communities together in shared, interpenetrating mutual needs. And there have always been two obstacles to the joining of need. Obstacles exacerbated in the age of the merchant, the soldier, and the missionary. The first obstacle is the struggle of vulnerability, lodged in the secret and in the private. We are vulnerable. We are creatures, and this is not a sin. We are vulnerable and we are creatures, and this is good. This is of God. We are vulnerable and we are creatures, and God intends that we meet each other in our vulnerability and in our creatureliness at the body of Jesus in the Spirit. We meet in God's own life at the site of the creature. Yet in order for needs to be joined, vulnerabilities have to be shared and freed from the fear of exploitation or harm. Here, the work of drawing the line brings us to the most intimate work of joining and sharing, speaking and testifying together of our vulnerabilities and our hopes in God. We must find ways to bring people together, to find their way to speak out of the depths of their lives into the depths of one another. The first obstacle of joining need is the struggle of vulnerability, and it's layered inside the second obstacle of breaking open our patterns of belonging, our racial, culture, gendered, and class forms of belonging. I'll return to this second obstacle when we consider the circle later on tonight, because this second obstacle is where the problem of the line meets the problem of the circle. So in summary, in this first lecture, I've invited us to consider how to draw lines that challenge the lines that constitute our lives both internally and externally. Lines drawn for us historically by the interaction of three agents: the merchant, the missionary, and the soldier. These lines configure our visions of home, property, prison, and our safety, and our nation as borders and our security. In order to do our gospel work, we must challenge the line, transgressing the line by removing the line and remapping it. Our sense of alliances must begin with the ground, real places and real spaces, and taking seriously our need for concrete connectivity with our specific environments. That sense of alignment, that sense of alliance must grow through the joining of people in their needs across the boundaries that divide us. The psalmist captured the sentiment and sense that we must have as we think the line redemptively when in the psalmist stated those famous words: "Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to the heavens, you are there. If I take my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you." The divine presence knows no geographic or human boundaries, and neither should we. Thank you very much.